Hi, guys. Welcome back. Today, we will be getting to know a character who had super strength, he had super long hair, and he's considered a superhero. And I'm talking about Samson. So just sit tight as we get into the biography of Samson here on Heroes 2. Joining us today to understand a little bit more about the life of Samson, we have Dr. Knight. Welcome, Dr. Knight. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing very well. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
We are very grateful to have you join us today because I know that I'm very curious about, a few facts about the life of Samson. I think that all of us, we know the main facts, and I think I just mentioned some of them, right? We know Samson as a guy who was really strong. We know Samson as a guy who had long hair and that he couldn't cut his hair. Right. And I think that as children, we all admired Samson because he was so strong. We also know that he was one of the last judges of Israel. And unfortunately, we know that because he fell in love with a woman who eventually betrayed him, cut his hair, he did lose his strength. Right. And he also lost his eyes, which I think was the most tragic part of his story. But eventually, he does have this moment of redemption when, again, his strength is restored so that he can complete what he, was set out to do. But we do have some questions because we want to get just some deeper insight past the facts, past the things that maybe we've been taught. We want to know a little bit more about his life story. So, my first question here is why do we like the story of Samson so much? Why is it that we are so attracted to the story of this really strong man, really unique man in the Bible?
Yeah, I think it's for exactly what you're saying that we think he was very strong. We
Yeah.
think that Samson possessed some strength that we do not have access to, that we do not have the power to have ourselves. And so
Mhm.
that just seems like, these Hercules stories and these
Yeah.
mythological stories that we hear oftentimes about people of great strength. And so I think that we're attracted to that. But I think there's a little bit of a twist to the story about whether or not Samson was even strong.
Huh. Interesting. Please tell us more about that because now that is very intriguing.
Yes. So, when we look in the Bible and we look at each time that Samson demonstrated some great feat, each time he demonstrated some great strength, we actually don't see the Bible saying that Samson was strong. We don't see the Bible saying that Samson exercises some great power. We see the Bible saying that the Spirit of the Lord came upon
Mm,
Samson and he did XYZ. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson and then he killed the people with the jawbone. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson. So it really doesn't talk about Samson being strong. And that should give us a lot of hope because we
yeah.
do not have to possess some supernatural strength on our own. We have access to the same Spirit of the Lord that gave Samson strength.
Oh, for sure. So I'm just going to cancel my gym membership now because why do I need to go to the gym to get super strength? I just have to call on the Spirit of the Lord. I think that that makes it even more relevant to know that he wasn't some super heroic, super strength, like you said, a Hercules archetype, right? That he had this superhero strength, but it wasn't because he had all of this strength inside of him, but it was the Spirit of God. And I think that makes him even stronger than we would ever even imagine than we can fathom sometimes. Am I right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, I think we just touched upon this a little bit. And the next question is why would we consider him a hero? But I think a lot of it has to do because when we think of a hero, we think of someone who has super something, right? When we think of a hero, they're either super fast, they can fly, super strong in this case. But is there another reason that we should consider Samson a hero?
Yeah, so even for the Spirit of the Lord to come upon him, he had to submit himself in some way.
Mhm.
Samson had to submit himself. And also, his story is kind of awesome. I mean, the fact that the angel of the Lord appeared to his parents and were like, look, you're going to have a child, and your child is going to help deliver your entire people group from the Philistines, your enemies, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that that alone is something that's like, wow, there's something special here. There is something going on where God ordained, even before he was born, before he was even
Mm,
conceived, God had a plan for Samson's life. So to me, there's a heroic part there just from submitting yourself to the Lord and the ways of the Lord. It talks about how he took the Nazarite vows, right? And his parents,
yeah.
his mother took the Nazarite vows, even when she had him in her womb, which is that she couldn't drink and they couldn't have carcasses around them. So I'm assuming they were probably vegetarian, right? So they had like this
Oh,
whole health message thing that they were pretty committed to. And I think that it still takes submitting yourself to God. So there's still some heroics there.
definitely. I think that that's something that once we get past maybe that childlike view that we might have about Samson, I think most of us might still be stuck on the image of, like you we mentioned before, this like strong
Yeah.
Samson. But I think that as we grow up, and as we experience life for ourselves, we realize that what makes him a real champion is, like you just said, the fact that he was able to submit himself to the will of the Lord and
Yeah.
to let God guide him in every aspect of his life, which then kind of
Well,
brings, you know,
kind of.
I was just going to say that, which then brings us to the next question. And the next question has to do with just that what is it that he struggled with? I know that we can kind of say a few of the things. We can say, in general, maybe he struggled with women or he struggled with this. But what was the root? What was the real thing that he did struggle with?
Yeah, so quite often, I think an area that we are strong can also be an area of weakness for us. And so,
Mm,
yes, he submitted himself at some times. He submitted himself, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him and used him mightily. Wonderful. And then
mhm.
there were some times, like when he went down to Timnah and he saw something in the enemy's camp that caught his eye. That's what the word of God says. Samson
Mm,
went down and he saw a woman that caught his eye. He did
mhm.
not submit himself to the Lord. But the awesome thing about Samson is that even in his foolishness, even in his refusal to fully submit to God, there were so many aspects that show us God was still at work. In fact, that's exactly what the Bible says. It says that his parents didn't even know it when he asked for this Philistine woman. His parents did not know it, but God was working, and he was working to
Mm.
create an opportunity for freedom for his people through Samson's foolishness, through his bad decision making. God was still working something out. So that gives me a lot of hope because I don't always submit the way I ought to, right? But God is still at work, and that is the beauty of his story.
Yeah, I think that definitely, like, thinking about our own lives now, and it might be easy to say, well, why didn't Samson submit? Like, how, sometimes we might be very harsh with him, but it's like, yeah, sure, maybe we don't fall, for a man or a woman the way that Samson felt, but there are other aspects in our lives where something caught our eye or caught our attention and eventually led us to disobey God, right?
Absolutely. And so that I think is the relatable part where we can really look at our own stories and recognize how
Yeah.
God is still at work in our own stories, especially when it's something that seems to be going against, like when we know that we have done something that God has not called us to do. We know we
Mm.
have not consulted God about it. We know we're just following our own desires. And here is
Mhm.
God still at work in our situation. And I think the awesome part about it as well is that it says his parents, his mother and father did not know it. They had committed their ways to the Lord. They had
Mhm.
committed their child to the Lord, right? And so they were in
Mhm.
contact with the Lord, and still they could not see how God could possibly work in this situation. And I think it gives us hope, even for other people that we might love in our lives, who we're
Yeah.
praying for them. And it just seems like God is not working. God is not doing the thing and delivering them in the way that we expect that God would. And yet the Bible
Mm.
tells us God was working. God was at work in this, even in his decision, because he was looking for an opportunity against the Philistines. He was looking for an opportunity once again to set his people free. And so that's encouraging for me.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that I'm getting from everything that you're sharing with us right now is that maybe we look at this story and it almost feels like a very tragic story, right? We almost feel like, well, look at him. He could have done such great things and it really didn't pan out completely. But to know that there is that aspect of the story where God was still working, I think makes it a very hopeful story for all of us because no matter what situations we're in, no matter how many times we might stray, we can have faith that God is still working with us and through us.
Yeah, and actually, another thing that gives me a lot of hope about his story is way down there in Hebrews, in the Hall of Fame of faith,
Yeah.
right? Samson's name is there.
Mm,
Samson, who was not at all, it seemed, on track with everything that God had called him to, who
mm,
died, right? Pushing the pillars apart. And it's like, well, oftentimes we try to figure out whether or not if somebody, has died by suicide, whether or not they would go to heaven and whether or not we do not know the plans of God. If
mm,
Samson didn't know that Hebrews chapter 12 and 13 and 14, he didn't know that Hebrews would be, including his name down there somewhere. And yet
mm,
we are able to see that down the line, God knew ahead of time that there would be his name down there in the Hall of Fame of
mm.
faith. Right. And so that's also encouraging for me. We never know what story is being written about our own lives right now. We are to be
Yes.
living epistles. And if we're going to be living epistles, that means our story is going to somehow impact other people's lives. And we don't know whose lives it might impact. We don't know that the Hebrews chapter 13 of our own lives, the Hebrews chapter 11,
Mm,
right, of our own lives, we don't even know that those things are coming. But we ought to rest in the fact that our lives have as much significance as well, as long as we continue to have faith, as long as we continue to submit ourselves to the Lord. And yes, Samson messed up. He wasn't always perfect, but God was still at work, even in his imperfections.
amen. You just gave us a whole sermon. What a powerful, powerful message using the life of Samson. And we've kind of touched upon all of these things that God was still doing in Samson's life. And that brings me to my next question. And it's, what was Samson's relationship with God like? Was this someone who walked very closely with God, although we might see little moments of his life where he does fail in his walk with God? But can we just assume that maybe he just never listened to God? Like, what was that relationship really like?
I have to assume that it wasn't that he never listened to God.
Hmm.
I have to assume that at some points he listened to God, and just
Hmm.
like us, at some points he does not, or he did not
Yeah.
always listen to God. And so I don't know that his relationship with God was very much different than our own. I think that oftentimes we try to look at behaviors and establish relationship through just behaviors. If I were looking just at his behaviors, I would say this guy has no relationship with God. If I'm just
Mm,
standing on the
yeah.
outside looking in, I would say there's no way. And yet, once again, we see the evidence down in Hebrews that, yeah, he had a relationship with God. Otherwise, he wouldn't be listed as someone who had great faith. And so,
Hmm.
I have to judge it based on what the Bible is telling me about his faith, because we're talking about faith in God. And I think that he got that established even from his parents. One of the things that I thought was really interesting about Samson's parents, even, and oftentimes the parents, kind of pass down their tradition of faith in the God of Israel, right? And so one of the things that I thought was interesting was that his parents would say to this angel that visited them, when these things come to pass. Not if, not should it happen, but when these things happen. And I think that Samson had a very, very much a when God comes through type attitude as well. Not a if. He was not concerned about whether or not he would push down those pillars. He was not concerned about whether or not he would kill all of those people with the jawbone of the donkey. He wasn't. It was a when attitude, not an if attitude. When the
Mm.
when God brings it to pass. And so I think that he had a relationship of faith that said when God does this thing, not if God does this thing.
Oh, that's very, very powerful. The fact that he walked in his own life, just very sure that it was never a question if something was going to happen. It was all about timing. It was all about when. And that brings us to our last question. I'm a little bit sad to realize that we're down to the last question, just because I feel like there's just so much we can unpack about the story of Samson, so much that we can learn. And we have been talking about all these different things that happen in Samson's life, how God continued to come through and work through Samson's life, how Samson is so much like us. So, what can we take from Samson's life and apply to our own lives?
So one thing that I think about parents. Maybe it's because I'm getting a little older myself, but I think about parents not necessarily attaching themselves to outcomes, but that's probably for all of us. And when I say
Yeah.
not attaching yourself to outcomes, I mean the things that we can see with our physical eyes, the senses even that we have, our physical senses, not attaching yourself to what you believe the outcome has been, right? If we look at Samson's life purely from how did his life end, we will say, wow, he died and he perished in that, temple. He pushed down the pillars and man, what an ending to his life. And I do believe that Samson's life was cut shorter than it had to be
Yeah.
because of his disobedience, maybe because he chose not to fully submit himself, right? But
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I still take away that message of God being at work. I take away the message of God knowing the end from our end from our beginning. Like the fact that God knows the Hebrews, chapter 13 of your life is being written. The
Yeah.
fact that God knows what's being penned right now in history books about your life and the impact you will have on the next generation. And that doesn't even mean if you have children, you might not have your own children. You are still impacting other people's lives every single day. And sometimes we might think to ourselves, but the pillars are coming down. The job is ending, but the marriage
Oh,
is ending. And all of these things seem to be crumbling around us, but God is still at work. And so to me, that is something that we can take and we can glean from the story and say, you know what? At the end of the day, God is still at work in my life. At the end of the day, God is still writing a story that I have not even seen the ending of, but I know it will glorify him in the end. So those things excite me.
mhm. Incredible. I feel
Yeah.
like you just came in here and decided that you were going to talk about Samson in such a way that you're going to completely change who my favorite Bible character is. I think that now I'm going to start looking at Samson in a much more favorable light. I think that we've been a little bit harsh with Samson. We've seen him only for his faults. And I mean, how sad is it that we've only seen him for his faults, knowing that we fall so many times, that we
Yeah.
fail, we fall short, we don't do what we're supposed to, we don't listen to God, we ignore his voice. But ultimately, if we can just hold on to the hope that God is still at work, now we don't know who we could be impacting in our lives, in our daily lives, right? As we walk around in the world, just kind of doing our own thing, just to keep in mind that God is working in every relationship that we have. So thank you so much, Dr. Knight, for joining
Yeah,
us today.
absolutely.
Thank you so much for all of the powerful insight that you gave us. You gave us a word, and I'm sure that we're going to take this word and just harbor it in our hearts. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And for everyone who is watching, this has been another Heroes biography, a powerful one at that. So make sure that you continue to come back and tune in and watch more of our Heroes biography. And until next time, we will see you right here during the month, just learning more about all the heroes that you can find in Heroes 2.